Aloha YouTube, this is Triple Play Doc, Dr. Mike Okuchi, coming in with some health news that I've ran across over these past couple days. This first article that I ran into talked about something that made me smile, and I posted a video about this on my TikTok and Instagram. And it talked about an experimental chewing gum that neutralizes SARS-CoV-2 in saliva. Now, anytime I see that headline, I gotta read into it. And what they found was that they could take this plant-based type of gum and it would actually decrease the viral load found in saliva. So, I mean, the ones that we know about, the precautionary measures are, masking, physical distancing, air filtration. We've been used to that. But if they came out with a gum that you could chew that would decrease that viral load, wouldn't that be an interesting thing, or wouldn't that be something that everybody would jump onto? Now, when we look at the virus replication, and there's a lot of science to this that backs this up, guys. When we look at the viral replication, they state that it happens mainly inside of the salivary glands, in the oral mucosal membranes, and also within the nasal cavities as well. And we don't hear this being talked about a lot in the mainstream media. They talk about the newer variants, that the viral load of those individuals with the Delta variant is 1,260 times higher than those with previous strains. So we know that all of these different variants, as we go down, in time, these variants are going to become higher, more virulent, meaning that they can replicate more. Now, will they be more life-threatening? That doesn't usually happen with most viruses. Most viruses, they become more transmissible, but less likely to kill you. So hopefully, right, crossing our fingers, hopefully it goes that way and it stays that way with what we're seeing with SARS-CoV-2. Now, they state here that viral inactivation in the mouth could be a useful strategy in reducing the spread of the virus. And if we go to the study, and this was found in molecular therapy, we go to the study and we look at the results here. So here's a little graphic representation of what happens in SARS-CoV-2. We see the virus with its spike protein, and its main route of entry is the ACE2 receptor site. So the role that the gum plays is that it acts as an inhibitor to that binding site. So right here, we see that the gum, you chew it and it would block the ACE2 receptor, and that should decrease the entry, right? So there's multiple things that has been focused on in the health community. One has been decrease in the transmission. So that's why we see physical masking. That's why we see physical distancing, air filtration. That's trying to decrease the entry of the virus. Now, in the event that the virus does enter your body, then we want to have mechanisms that blocks its entry into the cells, right? So we haven't really talked about that aspect, or I shouldn't say we, but mainstream media hasn't really talked about that aspect a lot. It's mainly focused on, okay, now that the virus has entered into your body, how do we mount an immunological response to that? And that's where the vaccines play the role, because the whole goal of the vaccines is to produce antibodies that act against the virus, right? That's the whole goal with that. And we're going to talk about the viral, or the implications of the vaccine on the viral load and how that impacts the body overall. Okay, but here's the graphical representation of how the gum should be working. And what they found is that the untreated, here's the graphic representation. We have the untreated, so you see high amounts of these viral particles. Okay, let me blow that up for you. See high amounts of these viral particles, and here's the placebo, and here's the results of utilizing the gum. So we have patient 1, patient 2, patient 3. So the ones that had placebo, we see minimal reduction in the viral load, and the ones that were utilizing the gum, the ACE2 inhibitor gum, we see a significant decrease in the viral load capacity. And viral load is what will determine the outcome of how people, they either resolve through it or they have, more complicated outcomes. And that's the biggest part of what we're seeing. So they state here that SARS-CoV-2 replicates in salivary glands, therefore debulking viruses in the oral cavity should decrease reinfection of people, in addition to prevention of transmission. If it's something as simple as chewing a gum, I would be really amazed. I'll be really amazed to that. Now, the other aspect is utilizing a nasal lavage, right? If we know that the virus replicates within the oral and nasal cavities, if we can do things that will decrease that viral load, why are we not focusing on that, right? Instead of just focusing on, okay, what happens when the virus gets in? Can we mount an immunological response, right? I say, let's look at all of the aspects, right? If you're in the middle of a war, why would you only focus on one aspect of your military attack? Why not focus on the different aspects, right? Why not focus on the front line? Why not focus on different strategies that will happen once the enemy crosses that frontline barrier and invades your fortress, right? We got to be focusing on all of these things, and I think the medical community is looking at those things. It's just that the mainstream media is not reporting that, nor is it being focused on if you happen to go to see your general practitioner as well. So, with nasal irrigation, this one doctor, Amy Baxter, she really focuses on nasal irrigation. And this is what I do with a lot of patients too, as a preventative measure. I tell patients that if you're going out and you're being exposed to a lot, whether or not you're physically distancing or wearing a mask, we know that the major route of transmission is through air. And a lot of studies have shown that the major route of transmission is through aerosolization. Not necessarily just through droplets. Yeah, there are, transmission through droplets, but not as much as what we're finding through aerosolization. So if we can reduce the exposure to those aerosols, right, and air filtration is a really big one, and utilizing the gum and utilizing nasal irrigation, we can decrease that viral load, which then has an impact on overall outcomes with COVID-19. Now, if we look at the nasal irrigation, what she recommends is using something like the neti pot, or they have like the neti pot spray, the spray bottle, and she recommends utilizing that over just the neti pot because of the higher pressure being better than utilizing gravity, right? But what she recommends here in this article is using the nasal irrigation with half a teaspoon of povidone iodine in the morning, and in the evening with 8 ounces of boiled lukewarm tap water with half a teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of salt per cup of water. And you know what? She's been seeing that it works a lot, really well with her patients. And hey, I say, why not, right? If we can utilize things to like a gum and we can utilize nasal irrigation to decrease that viral load, hey, why not? Now, a lot of people can't get access to this gum. Why? Because they're not in a clinical trial and it's not yet available. So can we do stuff like mouthwash? Maybe we can utilize just a general mouthwash, because if they're saying that we can decrease viral transmission through the washing of hands, why not washing of our nasal cavities and washing of our mouth, right? Why not? Now, the next one I wanted to talk about was what happens in just an overall infection, right? Why is SARS-CoV-2 so deadly, right? And if you look at this graph, and it comes from this study, what is it called? Adaptive immunity to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. You can find this in the Journal of Cell. It was published 2021, February 18th. So here's the links. You guys can go and take a look at this article. Now, what they talk about is that the adaptive immune system is important for control of most viral replications. And when we talk about the adaptive immune system, you got to understand that the immune system is split up into two parts. One is the innate immune system, and the adaptive immune system is the second part. The innate immune system is a more generalized part of our immune system, right? This is the one that as soon as something crosses the mucosal membrane, then something happens. We monitor an immune response with inflammation, swelling, trying to just flush out whatever it is. The adaptive immune system is the more specific one. This is the one that really targets that specific virus. And this is where the vaccines play a role in all of it. So we really need both of those parts of the immune systems to work properly in order for us to mount any type of protection in our body. So the reason why we're seeing such detrimental effects with SARS-CoV-2 is that it's able to evade the immune system, right? It's like if there's a criminal running around on the streets that can run away from the cops, it's going to be able to do the things that it's intended to do, like rob, right? So that's what's happening with SARS-CoV-2. It's tricking the immune system by evading it. And in the study, it says, in the case of SARS-CoV-2, the virus is clearly unusually effective at evading the triggering of early innate immune responses, such as type 1 interferons. It's plausible that much of the nature of COVID-19 as an illness is a consequence of this one big trick of SARS-CoV-2. So it's able to get away from that frontline innate immune response, which decreases that viral load. So if we can have a therapy that can lower that viral load, right? Like nasal irrigation, like cleaning out the oral cavity, because we know where it hides and it replicates. And we know that it's evading that innate immune response. Then we give our body a much better chance of mounting a response to it. Okay? Yes. And I'm going to show you a study, yes, where we're seeing antibodies being produced through vaccination. Yeah, okay? So we got to get that off the table. A lot of people, we talk about vaccines and we're pointing fingers about it. Yes, the vaccines do mount an antibody response, but I'm going to show you a study that is stating, well, just because it is that the most optimal way? Okay, so we can get that off the table. If we look at SARS-CoV-2 here, so let's look at this graph here. This graph shows what happens in just the average infection in the body. This shows us what's happening here. The infection comes in and the innate immune response rises and then falls over time, and it triggers the adaptive immune response where we see the production of antibodies, and then we also see the production of the T cells, CD4, CD8. That's a natural progression of an infection. Now, what we see, and they're stating the average SARS-CoV-2 infection, we see this rise in the viral load and a very low innate immune response. And then that viral load rises and the adaptive immunity kicks in, where we see a rise in antibodies and T cells. And what they're showing is that the T cells plays a more integral role than just the antibodies. So you need that T cell response as well as the antibody response to decrease that viral load. Now, when we have a severe infection, we see that the viral load stays kind of low and it evades that innate immune response. So it's rising, and you see here where the innate immune response is very, very low. And then at the last part of the infection where the viral load is very high, that's when we see the innate immune response kick up really high, That's why we see a huge inflammatory reaction in severe infections, and then a huge antibody release. But if you see here, the T cell response is really, really low, and it's very hard for this viral load to decrease. Okay? That's what we're seeing in the SARS-CoV-2 with a severe response. Now, what they're saying here is that if it's evading that innate immune response, then we don't necessarily have a chance about it. So going back to what I talked about initially, if we can decrease the viral load, then we give our body that much more of a chance. Now let's jump over to the study that I talked about with the vaccination and how it's affecting the body. So here we see in this study that was published in October in Cell Discovery that they're stating that the comprehensive investigation revealed consistent pathophysiological alterations after vaccination with COVID-19 vaccines. Now, what that means is that we are seeing an adverse response to the vaccines, not in the sense where people are dying, but we're seeing a response in the sense of we're not getting the response or we're getting collateral damage in addition to the response that we want. Okay. So, like I said earlier, in the course of a vaccination, the whole goal is for it to produce antibodies. Okay. And yeah, they found it in this report. It says, besides generation of neutralizing antibodies, okay, so they state, we did produce antibodies by utilizing the vaccine. The consistent alterations in HbA1c or hemoglobin A1c, serum sodium and potassium levels, coagulation profiles, and renal functions in healthy volunteers after vaccination with an inactivated SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So this is different than the mRNA. This is the inactivated, so a traditional type of a vaccine. They're seeing alterations in all of these different markers in the body. Okay? They're seeing consistent alteration in gene expressions of different immune cell types. Okay? They're seeing increase in NF-kappa B signaling and reduced type 1 interferon responses. So we're seeing that the innate immune response is delayed, and also we're seeing an increase in inflammation, right? So if we go back to that other study that I talked about with the adaptive immune response, with a vaccine, for an inactivated vaccine, we're seeing this type of response, okay? So we're seeing a delayed innate immune response. We're seeing the antibodies that is producing that, but we're also seeing a decrease in the T cells there. So their conclusion, it says that our study recommends additional caution when vaccinating people with pre-existing clinical condition, including diabetes, any electrolyte imbalances, renal dysfunction, and coagulation disorders. Okay? Because they did this study with healthy volunteers, and they saw a change in all of those metabolic profiles that's inducing things like a type of diabetes or pre-diabetes. It's inducing renal issues. So what they're saying here is that if we're going to vaccinate people that have these conditions, like diabetes, renal dysfunction, coagulation disorders, or cardiovascular issues, that it may not be the best thing, right? So we're going to be creating antibodies, but at the same time, our collateral damage, if you have these issues, is going to mount, okay? Now, this was, again, for an inactivated vaccine. So the inactivated SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So this was a vaccine called Varicella Sinovac. Okay, so you guys can go and look that up. So this was a study done with that. Now, I'm not saying, and I don't have studies that points to it, or I haven't found studies yet that points to these types of issues with like the mRNA and all that stuff. But what I'm saying is that if we're just looking at a vaccine to induce antibodies, then it's working. But if we're looking at the overall health picture, we're getting too much collateral damage for the benefits of what we're trying to accomplish. Okay? So, with that said, we need to do more research. We need to do more research on all of these things, and we need to be taking a broader approach rather than just a singular approach. Okay? So, I got all the links to these studies in the description below. Again, it's Triple Play Doc. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me everywhere. I got a podcast as well called Triple Play Performance Podcast, where I interview different guests and I talk about different health topics, all things revolving around your health, because my whole goal is to help empower you, to help to educate you, and help to elevate you so that you can live your best life. Again, this is Triple Play Doc, signing off saying be well and aloha.